My name is Sheila Karuna. Welcome to another chapter of A Soul's Journey by Peter Richelieu. For those of you, if you're just finding this for the first time, you might want to go back to the channel, and there's a playlist that will cover all of the chapters from the beginning. And for those of you who are following along with me, we're in chapter 8. If you have this book in particular, there are several versions of it. We're on page 120, and it begins. It must have been about 11 o'clock, and for the last 10 minutes, I had been sitting at my desk reading over the notes I had made of last night's happening, when suddenly the pleasant voice that I now know so well broke into my reverie. Well, Henry, my friend, so you have accomplished something worthwhile at last. Now perhaps you will admit that you have been able to prove for yourself those things which I told you in my early talks were facts to me. It was Achara who had entered my room in his usual unobtrusive manner. Yes, Achara, I am bound to admit that. I am beginning to realize that even the things you have told me about in past talks, and which I have not yet been able to prove conclusively, are undoubtedly provable with more experience. I suppose you are well aware of what happened last night, and it is not necessary for me to hand you my report, but I would like you to read it so that you may check up and see if I have forgotten anything of importance. Achara replied that he was only too willing to read my report and that he wished to see the record of the second astral journey which we took together. He added he would talk about them for a little while before passing on to more tuition. After finishing these records, his face showed his appreciation of my efforts. He was obviously extremely pleased that I had been able to put into actual practice some of the tuition he had so patiently given me during the past week or two. I told him how much I was in debt for his unselfish and much needed help, but he assured me that I need not feel in any way indebted to him, for cases like mine were his particular job in life, and that he was well rewarded if those he taught benefited from that teaching in a real and practical way. He then started to comment on the past 2 nights, and I listened most attentively. This is what he said. I must first explain why I took you to the third sphere of the astral world via London. As you know, this is quite unnecessary. My reason for it was to make you realize that any town in the world which you might go to in your astral body looks the same as the physical town you are familiar with, though what you see is not physical, but the astral counterpart of the physical places as they exist on the first sphere of the astral world. In future, it will be better to start your journeying from Colombo. You will find it just as easy to get up to spheres higher than the third, which is where you made contact with Daphne, as the same machinery operates. But to do this, it is necessary to have a particular place on each sphere which you visualize in thought, and to which your astral body will be transported in the course of a few seconds' time, as you know it here. I expected that you might possibly become a little afraid when your surroundings became blurred and you felt a sense of movement. I must congratulate you on not having experienced an initial failure, which I have noticed sometimes happens to my pupils. They become frightened and almost simultaneously awaken in their physical bodies, with beating hearts produced by their fear. Actually, you have experienced this, for last night you returned to your physical body for a time without having any intention of doing so, when your excitement got the better of you, whilst making your attempt to reach Daphne without any assistance from me. It is unnecessary for me to say anything much concerning the second sphere of the astral world, for much, for it is very like the first, only less crowded and less noisy. In the two spheres nearest to the physical world, the permanent inhabitants live more or less the type of life that has always appealed to them in the physical world. In most cases, such people do remain there for the whole of their astral existence. There are exceptions who are so attached to the material existence that they have no desire to progress to the higher spheres of the astral world, but they are forced to do so after a period that might run into 2 or even 300 years, at which time the ego urges the vehicle he is occupying to pass through the second death to the mental world. This method of progress is not the usual one, and it would not be yours when the time comes for you to pass into the astral world. You have already realized, from seeing the activities of but a few people who live on the third sphere, that the life there would appeal to you considerably more than a round of visits to restaurants, theaters, or cinemas. I was able to show you both artists and musicians at work in the third sphere. But you must realize that this sphere is not limited to artists or musicians, and it would have been quite as easy for me to show you great engineers, craftsmen devoted to some particular trade. In fact, every type of individual whose consuming interest in life is not bound up with purely material amusements or pursuits. When you were listening to the music played by the group under Johann Strauss, you saw a few members of that parallel evolution called the Deva Kingdom. When you have had experience of spheres higher than the third, you will find that not only are they much more numerous there, but that they cooperate more and more with members of the human evolution the further we get away from the material life. You may think that their existence is preferable to ours, that you would prefer to evolve from fish, butterflies, and birds into the state of elemental nature spirits and eventually to a stage of deva, such as you saw comprised the orchestra that performed in the wood. We cannot change our evolution except in very exceptional circumstances. You probably wondered why I spent so much time at the academy showing you the work that goes on in buildings of this kind. I did so for two reasons. The first reason was that you should realize that this was but one of the many schools which exist in the astral world where people can get tuition in the particular art in which they are interested, tuition which enables them to be born in their next life with a desire to continue to study along these lines, so that a few of them at least can become great masters of their art and help the physical world to progress in both culture and learning. My second reason you must have guessed for yourself. I realized I did not finish my coffee before I started this, and it's going to get really cold if I don't. So please pardon me. Through your having such a clear picture of that academy in your mind after you had returned to your physical body in Colombo, you were able to get back to that spot quite easily and without any stupendous effort. From there, you were able to contact Daphne and continue your astral plane experiences. Do not forget this for the future. Pinpoint a certain building or view in your mind, and you can use that pinpointed picture as a thought form on which to concentrate when you desire to go to that particular sphere of consciousness. I hope that you have realized very pertinently pertinently, sorry, the necessity of knowing the way in which time affects your sojourn at the astral level. I went into detail over this important point so that you should understand how to investigate should the occasion arise. Our journey to the part of the astral world where the ceremony was being held requires no comment. You will remember that after we arrived there and seated ourselves on the roots of one of the trees at the edge of the open space, I warned you to be as quiet as possible. The reason was that although the members of the Deva kingdom do not really object to any human seeing them at their work, they do not like interruptions of any sort. You will have noticed the intensity of purpose that prevailed throughout the whole ceremony. The little men or gnomes who came out of the forest in the early stages and started the proceedings with their chanting and beating of drums are on a much lower level of evolution than both you and the members of the orchestra. One thing, though, must have been apparent, that all of them seemed to be concentrating with their whole strength on the work in hand. There was no levity or chatter such as one is used to at a concert in the world. Immediately prior to the performance, it is this remarkable difference that I wish to impress upon you, for if you are able to understand the members of the Deva evolution, and I trust in due time work in conjunction with them, you must realize that life is a very serious business to them, and levity does not usually enter into their proceedings. Not that they are unable to laugh. They are indeed extremely happy people who seem to enjoy the simple pleasures of nature, but they do not allow outside influences in any way to disturb the perfection of the work to which they set their hands. In order that you may understand what follows, I must digress for a few moments. You have probably heard of initiates, arhats, and that's ARHATS, and adepts in our evolution. These terms occur in occult books, but little has been written about them. Briefly, I can tell you this much for the moment. As man evolves along the road that is set before him, he is actually under the control and guidance of a group of adepts who are perfected men, perfected man, but who were, as you are, countless thousands of years ago. No, sorry, let me start that again. As man evolves along the road that is set before him, he is actually under the control and guidance of a group of adepts who are perfected man, but who were, as you are, countless thousands of years ago. These men have finished the course of their lives to be lived at the physical level, for they have learned all the lessons that the physical world has to teach. Because of their developed love for humanity as a whole, they have elected to remain, at some sacrifice to themselves, as you may understand later on, in connection with this planet to help it on and to assist in its development. Personally, I feel this is referring to what the Joshua channelings would call the light workers, to perhaps complete also their journey to, or have completed, either way, their journey from ego-based consciousness to a heart-based consciousness. These adepts are sometimes referred to as masters because some of them take pupils, men living in the world and not yet perfect in any sense of the word, to help them with the work that has to be done. These pupils I often feel like I meet people that we have work to do. So isn't that interesting? That just got flashed in. Hmm. These pupils are given many opportunities of development which are not open to mankind in general, but you may be sure that they have earned these opportunities, and it is not in any way a question of favoritism that they have been picked out from the bulk of humanity for this special work. It is hard work and usually means that such men have to give up many of the things they would do in the world in order to devote themselves exclusively to learning how they can help humanity without receiving any material benefit in return for that work. It is selfless service that they offer, and their only reward is that they are allowed to contact personally in sleep when using their astral bodies these perfected men whom they have agreed to serve. Such pupils, after many lives of work and special training, are prepared for initiation ceremonies. These ceremonies give them powers that help make them different from the ordinary run of human beings. They teach a man how to read other men's minds, for by the time that such a man has developed to this state, he will never use that power for anything other than to help a fellow human being. He is taught how to have continuity of consciousness at all levels, as I am teaching you to have continuity of consciousness at the astral and physical levels only. That is something which is difficult for you to understand as yet. Such men can, if necessary, work what the world calls miracles, but this is never done except on the instructions of one of the adepts who help to govern the planet. There are 5 stages of initiation, and only when the 5th is reached is a man perfect and free from the necessity of being born again into the physical world. Sometimes the lives of initiates are extended so that a man lives long beyond the normal span. But this is only done for special purposes or because that man is needed in a particular country in the world to wield an influence which may make a difference to future generations. During the Deva ceremony at which you were present, you noticed that the young girl who took the solo part in the symphony remained at the top of one of the tall trees on the edge of the glade and did not at any time approach the members of the orchestra or come down to the ground. There is a reason for this. These girls are trained especially for the work they do. They live apart from the main body of the Deva people and are in fact dedicated to their particular work. For this, they have to develop extremely sensitive bodies and minds that can attune themselves to the particular object which is being carried out. This girl, for instance, is a highly evolved being. She is an initiate in her evolution, and so has knowledge and powers far greater than the average type of deva whom you will meet from time to time. Then there was the priest who completed the ceremony and invoked the beings who control the universe to help the work that was being done. He too was a highly evolved being, but nothing near an initiate, and probably not even a pupil of one of the perfected men. His calling was that of a priest who has been taught to gather up the force that has been generated by the concentrated music and the concentrated thoughts of those present, and to transmit it through the power of thought to the meeting being held in the physical world. You may perhaps not believe that such things are possible, and there is no necessity for you to do so. But to say, quote, such things cannot be, end quote, is just as foolish as became believing only became someone else has assured you because, sorry, it says became, but um, to say such things cannot be is just as foolish as believing only because someone else has assured you that such and such a thing is true. I welcomed the opportunity Daphne gave us of seeing her little cottage, for I knew that at certain times she would not be occupying her room at the academy. Also, I was glad for you to see that there were many people living in the valley where Daphne's cottage is, for I want you to meet and talk to some of those people. Your story and the efforts you are making to live a life apart from your body whilst still living in the world will not only be interesting to some of them, but it will help them also. Some are not as evolved as you are and have not had in past lives the opportunities for progress which you had, and which you have led to your being have had led to your being given a special tuition in this life. Because you have been privileged to be taught, you too must be willing and anxious to pass on any knowledge that you have to others. And that's a very real thing. Once I started understanding some things, I would never hold back my thoughts and feelings about how I feel this is all working. Um, Also knowing that I have a very specific perspective on it that may not be the same as everybody else's. Back to the book. Your intention, oh, let me take a sip of coffee first. Your intention of publishing the gist of my talks with you and your wanderings out of your body as a book is a good thing, but that will only help others who are still living in the world. What I tell you now and in future talks is not for your ears alone, but for the ears of anyone who is interested enough to want to understand. When you are told things that have to be kept secret, it is usually because the possession of such knowledge would enable men to do harm to others. If such knowledge were used for selfish purposes, but I can assure you that you are never left in doubt about such matters at the stage in development when that type of knowledge may be given to you. This brings me to the end of your record covering the second astral journey, and I must congratulate you on the details you were able to bring through. Your determination to remember as the reason was the reason for your success, and if you will only realize that willpower is, to a great extent, the open sesame to most of your difficulties, you will continue to have success in the future. And the only important detail that you did not seem to remember, and which you probably did not realize at the time, was that during the ceremony in the open glade, there were several hundred members of the Deva kingdom floating gently, more or less, hovering, immediately above the open clearing, and perhaps some 15 to 20 feet above the tops of the trees surrounding the glade. They were not merely spectators or a congregation such as we see in a big church in the world, but they were most certainly active participants in the ceremony, through whose efforts mainly the necessary force of which I have spoken was generated. It would have been interesting if you had seen them, for you would have noticed that at the end of the invocation made by the bearded priest, they seemed to gather up the force for good that had been generated and immediately afterwards moved off in a compact body, presumably to ensure its achieving the desired results. Do not let this lapse on your part worry you in the least, for I can assure you that you have done very well indeed. The urge you felt to try things out for yourself the following night was quite a natural one, and whenever similar urges impress you in the future, always act upon them immediately. I feel like that's true too. If it's an urge, if it's a nudge, do it. No matter what it is, you may not understand it. It may seem counterintuitive to you, but for myself, I have always found that there is something valuable for me in that nudge or in that urge to do something. The urge comes from the ego, which is you, and the ego is only too willing for you to progress in knowledge of this kind. And here I kind of feel as though the word ego is not being used the same as we would use it. When I use the word ego, I am referring to my little wounded personality self, that which has been programmed and conditioned over all the years in this particular vessel. Here, I feel as though it is being used in conjunction with the term perhaps soul, which is also a part of the wounded inner child and personality, but at a higher level. The higher self is what I guess I'm feel that this is referring to. Activities on Back to the book. Activities on the higher. No, I'm going to start that again. The urge comes from the ego, which is you, and the ego is only too willing for you to progress in knowledge of this kind. Activities on higher levels than the physical are much more interesting to an ego than the artificial amusements and the normal routine activities that we have to go through in the physical world. The ego, of course, realizes that our physical plane lives are necessary for his progress in evolution, but the goal of this ambition is always the same: for man to emancipate himself and to learn as quickly as possible the lessons that our countless lives are meant to teach us. By doing so, he will all the sooner be free from the necessity of being reborn again and be able to take up a different and much more interesting existence, such as is only possible for someone who has learned all the lessons that have to be learned through the medium of physical existence. You can see for yourself how much easier it is for me to explain things now, as you have a fairly good idea of the life that people live on the first, second, and third spheres of the world next to this. The third sphere, as you have seen, provides most of the schools for training students in the different arts, and very soon I shall show you the fourth sphere, which is really a continuation of the third. The first and second spheres form one stage. The third and fourth, the second stage. The fifth and sixth, the third stage. And the seventh sphere is the frontier between the astral and the mental worlds. On the fourth sphere, we find many musicians and artists who work alone and do not wish to teach, or perhaps have finished teaching for the time being. We find doctors doing research work. A number of new remedies to fight sickness and disease are discovered at the astral level. Many groups of research students get together and exchange ideas, although they do not have any physical guinea pigs to work upon. Their theories are in due time perfected and impregnated upon the minds and brain cells of doctors doing similar work in the physical world. If you were to ask any medical man engaged in research in this world whether he had at any time awakened in the morning with the germ of an idea which possibly would take him months to perfect and put into practice, but which eventually became one of the new advances in medical science, he would probably admit that such was the case. There are buildings, both large and small, which seem to be what we would describe as mental hospitals. Although astral life makes it possible for any normal human being to be completely happy, there are still large numbers of people who cry for the moon and want the impossible. They worry as they worried in life, and a form of mental neurosis is the usual result. The astral body not only includes a counterpart of the human brain, but it also includes within itself a mental vehicle, commonly referred to as the mind. A man can be troubled by his mind after death, remorse for hasty actions and words in his past life, which he now realizes can never be entirely obliterated, cause him a certain amount of suffering, intense or otherwise, according to the sensitivity of the individual. Such cases are often treated by doctors who specialize in mental troubles, with great benefit to both doctor and patient. On the fifth and sixth spheres, you will find still more research workers, such as psychoanalysts and brain, heart, and other specialists. It is quite usual for doctors and specialists in different branches of science to live many consecutive lives in which they carry on with the same type of work. You can imagine how invaluable it is to such men to meet their confreres at the astral level, where all knowledge is pooled in the interests of humanity. There are groups of philosophers who wish to help the world in their particular way. They feel that if the trend of thought in the world were changed to more progressive lines than wars and national domination, life would be considerably more comfortable and more desirable. There are mystics who believe that mankind can best be helped by meditation along such lines as, quote, unity of life. There are other deeply religious beings who feel that men can advance only if he is attached to some religious belief or dogma. Such men endeavor to produce a perfect religion by taking points of doctrine from all the great religions of the past and present and blending them into a new philosophy. The Devas concern themselves deeply with all this work, as you will see for yourself in due time. On these levels, world economic problems are discussed and worked upon for months and years. When certain conclusions are arrived at by these specialists, remedies are tried out by means of impressing these conclusions upon the minds of human beings living in the world who are in positions where their advice will be acted upon by nations or powerful groups of reformers. For mankind must be helped when crises in the world are too great and too serious for them to solve by their own endeavors. In periods of crisis, great world leaders seem to stand on a pinnacle and shine. Often a man who previously was but a humble politician or leader of a party arises and becomes a prominent figure in world politics wisdom and leadership far above what would normally be expected of him as is the result which we can all observe. When the crisis is over and his great work is finished, such a man seems to go back into his former obscurity. Such men are chosen and they are helped by one or other of the great beings who brood over this universe for the benefit of mankind. Whilst the period of overshadowing lasts, they are indeed supermen. But when the crisis is over, this overshadowing has to be withdrawn, for each man has free will by right and may only be helped so far and no farther. On these levels, there are men who are interested in the growing shortage of food for a humanity that is increasing by millions each year. Devas help with their problems by suggesting new methods of cultivation. These suggestions are put into the minds of those living in the world who are responsible for such problems in their particular regions. In this way, new ideas and methods come to light and are gradually adopted by mankind. Oh, pardon me, I got something in my eye. I'm going to pause this for a moment and take care of this. So I didn't mark where I stopped. So if I'm repeating myself, I do apologize, but this is proof that I am not AI reading this, eh? So on these levels, there are men who are interested in the growing shortage of food for a humanity that is increasing by millions each year. Devas help with their problems by suggesting new methods of cultivation. These suggestions are put into the minds of those living in the world who are responsible for such problems in their particular regions. In this way, new ideas and methods come to light and are gradually adopted by mankind. You will be able to attend some of the conferences which take place in these spheres and prove for yourself that what I am telling you is indeed true. But it is not likely that you will be able to remain at such conferences until conclusions are reached, for they often go on for weeks or months, calculated by your idea of time, and naturally you will have to return to your body after a few hours away from it. Great progress is often made at such conferences, and suggestions are made to people living in the world, which enable humanity to advance in all its different ways. You probably have wondered why the world progresses much more quickly one century than another. It is not only that distances have been obliterated by air travel and such things as wireless, but simply because mankind in general is slowly but surely becoming more interested in solving existing problems. And by such solution, the masses benefit. In other words, the more evolved men are becoming more and more unselfish, which proves that they, at least, have learned some of the lessons that lives in the physical world are meant to teach us all. It is difficult to explain the work of the Deva kingdom, for the methods used are so very different from those to which you are accustomed. To understand it all, you have to remember that the Deva kingdom controls to a large extent the part of life we call nature. The seas, the winds, the use of the sun in cultivation, and such things as the correct times of the year for planting different seeds are all part of the particular domain of the Devas. They join in discussions with members of our evolution when their specific knowledge and experience can be utilized. Usually, they transmit their thoughts through a mental process and not through words, but they can use the medium of speech when it is necessary for them to do so. From time to time, you hear in the world of a tornado, a cyclone, or an earthquake that leaves in its wake much loss of human life, devastation, and thousands of homeless. You may have wondered why a beneficent providence would allow such things to happen. But have you looked for the possible reason of such tragedies? Is it not true that previous to such devastation, men and women have been living in those places under conditions which breed crime instead of progress? A tragedy such as I visualize could easily be the means of awakening a slothful government to its responsibilities, and often a rebuilding scheme is at once commenced so that those who remain alive may be housed under conditions considerably more favorable than before. The devas control these cyclones and earthquakes, and I know from personal experience that their pity for a humanity which through its blindness makes such disasters necessary is great indeed. They allocate large numbers of their people to meet those unfortunates who lose their lives through these disasters as they pass from the physical to the astral world, and do all in their power to minister to their fear and help them acclimate themselves to their new conditions. It is the same when world wars take place and innumerable souls are slung out of their bodies by modern weapons. There are insufficient astral helpers belonging to our evolution to deal with the rate of killing that accompanies an army advancing against heavy opposition. So members of the Deva kingdom take their places side by side with men to do what they can to help the many who are terrified at the moment of their passing. It is indeed true that there are times when men and angels or devas walk in unison, each serving God to the utmost of his being. I must tell you now a little I must now tell you a little about life as it is lived on the seventh and last sphere of the astral world. The first thing that will strike you when you visit that part is the complete absence of buildings of any sort. There are no signs of human habitation at all, but you will find that there are permanent residents living at this level, although they do everything in their power to discourage contact when other humans approach. Such men are of the opinion that their progress in evolution can only be accomplished by resorting to complete seclusion and a life of silence. In the physical world, there are holy men who live apart from humanity in out of the way places at the foot of or at the top of lonely mountains where humans seldom penetrate. These men spend their whole lives in meditation, fasting, and living what the world would describe as an ascetic life. Such men are the same after death, and in due time they make their way to the seventh sphere of the astral world and continue their lives of meditation there. You will find men who, during their earthly lives as monks or friars, members of brotherhoods which enjoined absolute silence as a life and a life apart from other normal human beings. These men have become so used to living within themselves, praying for long periods for the helping of mankind, that after death they derive solace in continuation of the same existence that they lived for so many years on Earth. There is no necessity at the astral level for such persons to seek for a cave or build themselves houses to live in. Neither food nor accommodation is necessary to their existence, so they usually live in the open, in woods, and out of the way places where they are most likely to be left alone and undisturbed. In addition to the humans who live at this level, you will find countless numbers of highly evolved members of the Deva kingdom who carry on work but have no contact whatever with the members of our evolution. You will also find those human beings whose sojourn at the astral level is over and who have to pass through the seventh sphere in order to reach the mental world, through which they must pass on their journey back to the higher part of themselves, the ego, who has his natural habitat on the higher spheres of the mental world called the causal level. These humans are usually accompanied to the seventh sphere by their guides, who are men like themselves, but more evolved and older souls. The particular work of these guides is to explain in detail what is meant by, quote, the second death, end quote. The journey from the astral world to the mental world is entirely painless and is merely the dropping of another sheath. The guides make it their business to eradicate any fear that might arise in the minds of these people, for although we have all traveled the same journey many times before, after each physical incarnation has been completed, yet we do not remember those previous journeys, because for each new physical incarnation, we have entirely new mental, astral, and physical bodies, which do not carry with them detailed memories of past lives. The passing from the astral to the mental world is something outside the control of the average individual, and when his time comes, he is forced to drop his astral body for the simple reason that he has no further experience to gain at the astral level. He must then pass to the mental world in order to consolidate the mental work that he has accomplished during his physical existence and add it to the reservoir of knowledge contained within the permanent atom representing all of his previous lives. Having received all the necessary information that can be given to him on the subject of his passing, the man gradually falls asleep and awakes almost immediately in the mental world, having during that brief moment of sleep dropped his astral body forever. Friends meet him in the mental world in exactly the same way as friends met him when he passed from the physical to the astral world. He commences an entirely new type of life. In the case of the average man, this is usually much shorter than his life in the astral world, though the duration is longer for evolved men. The astral body, which has been left behind by the individual who has passed on, takes some little time to disintegrate and return to the main mass of astral matter. During the period of disintegration, the body retains a likeness to the individual who previously occupied it. You must understand that it is only a shell, yet owing to the fluidic nature of astral matter, it can move about and to an inexperienced person seems to retain a semblance of life. I have seen people who have visited this seventh sphere during their physical plane existence, nonplussed at finding that they are unable to get into conversation with some of these shells, which they find floating about. Have a sip of coffee here. Mhm. Icy cold, but still delicious. A shell is not a corpse in the sense that the physical body after death is a corpse, because although it has no connection whatsoever with the real man, the ego who has dropped it, yet it still contains a little life. Indeed, until the disintegration is complete, the shell must think of itself as a man, for it is a fragment, a shadow of the man who is gone. At spiritualistic seances, we sometimes see manifestations of various sorts when, instead of the sitters getting into touch with the man himself, they only contact the shell. This can happen when the man has been dead a long time. A friend of a sitter seems to come back and talks to them, yet in various ways he does not appear to be as intellectual as he used to be. He seems to have deteriorated. That is impossible. A man does not deteriorate. He progresses on the other side of death. So whenever one comes into contact with such a case, one may be sure that it is not the real man at all, but only his fragment, this shell he has left behind. Although a shell is inanimate, it is quite possible for other creatures to enter it and take it on as a temporary body and play the part of the original man. This is often done by astral beings who enjoy playing practical jokes, and by playful nature spirit who may take hold of one of these shells, put it on as one would an overcoat, and masquerade in it. The man masquerading inside the shell will very likely give, quote, proof of his identity for whatever entered the brain of the original occupant during his lifetime will have passed into the astral counterpart, and it will remain there for the use of any entity masquerading in that body. In many cases, a certainty may be acquired by an investigator who is sufficiently clairvoyant to see what is behind the shell. But whoever is investigating needs to take great care, for even the shell from which the fragment of the man has disappeared can be galvanized into activity within the aura of a medium. You may come into contact with shells sometime in the future. One thing you can be quite sure about is that they are in no way dangerous and can do you no harm. This concludes my talk for today. You have undoubtedly realized that it completes my very brief survey of life on the different spheres of the world next to this. I want you to prepare a list of questions for me to answer tomorrow morning. After that, when you have had several days of experimenting on your own, I shall visit you again and tell you something about life as it is lived in the mental world. I shall not be able to give you as much detail of this world as I have been able to give you about the astral world, because it is much more difficult to provide analogies of what takes place in the mental world and compare them with similar things that take place in the physical world. Life there is so very different from here, for everything has to do with thought. Here you have tables and chairs and buildings. In the astral world, thoughts are the tables, chairs, and buildings. In fact, There is nothing there but thought. So you can well understand my difficulty. I shall probably take you on a short visit to the mental plane also, in the hope that you will be able to remember something of what you sensed rather than what you saw there. But I shall tell you more about this in the future. I shall come again tomorrow at the usual time when I hope your list of questions will be ready. Well, that concludes chapter 8, and I will be right back with chapter 9. I hope that you will move in each moment towards that which brings you joy. And until we meet again, be well, my friends.